there's a general tendency to believe that plastics is not a very good product to have, or not a very good commodity to have. So with that in mind, we've got some real problems being in the plastics industry, because we would like to use plastic for the reasons I'll mention. Because is ending use of plastic a good thing? Well, if you look at specifically any individual commodity usage, plastics saves about over 50% of the CO2 gas. When you make plastic, you use about over 82% savings in water, 52% savings in energy. So the resource utilization, and there were some great comments about plastics in cars to reduce the weight. The resource utilization of plastic really, really pays for itself. So I don't think we were ready to say we need to live our life without plastic. What about packaging? Now, packaging has some huge savings using plastic, whether it be the 54,000 kilograms of weight savings using plastic for packaging, or the 1.1 billion kilojoules savings, or the 75 million metric tons of CO2 gas that are saved by using plastic. So whether it's for packaging, whether it's for other products, there's a lot of good, solid reasons for using plastic. So plastics have become very, very prevalent in our lives. They have good reason for that. It's not just not somebody visioning it. It's a good, sound economic and environmental reasons. There's increasing demand on the resources, likely to drive up more resource costs in the long term. However, recycling of plastics is very, very far behind everybody else. That's a big, big problem and a big opportunity lost. So plastic waste, and particularly in the oceans, has become an emotional catalyst, which is what I showed you those pictures of people who are trying to find ways to live without plastics. It's an emotional catalyst for an anti-plastic movement. So the public, in a way, has become unclear. They see some of the visual problems with plastic, such as in the ocean, and the stories they hear about developing countries. They don't really understand the economic and environmental benefits of using plastic. And so consequently, they become very unclear, and what we have to do is figure out a way to get them back to thinking that plastic is the coolest material on the planet, as it was thought of back in Dustin Hoffman days, or the Graduate movie days. That's a real challenge, because like I say, we have a legacy to overcome of bad publicity. Everybody continues to enjoy the benefits. Obviously, the shipping and the resource-efficient manners are benefits. We better manage plastics at end of use would be helpful, but we're not there yet, and we need to keep figuring out ways to do it. And it's all the people in this room that we've already heard from will make a difference there. First step is responsible waste management. Actually, it's responsible resource management. If we think of plastics as a resource, the end-of-life products of plastic as a resource rather than a waste, then the whole conversation takes a different tone. It becomes much more about how do we make sure we preserve that resource? How do we reuse that resource? Those are the key issues we have to face. So collecting it, aggregating it, obviously biodegradable plastics might be having a use in some areas where it's unlikely to be collected. Clearly, we have to recycle more. Obviously, that's of very interest to me. And then we have to keep focusing on the energy recovery or the waste energy opportunities that for material that can't be recycled. Why is recycling so important? As I mentioned to you, 80–90%. In other words, we only use about 10% of the energy using recycled plastic to create a new plastic product. That's what we're doing. MBA Polymers is creating a brand new equivalent to virgin plastic product at the end of our recycling machinery. We save 80–90% of the energy versus having to use petrochemicals to make plastic. Obviously, we save enormous CO2 gas, 2 to 4 tons of CO2 savings for every ton of plastic we use versus virgin. For our recycled plastic we use instead of virgin. And of course, keeping the plastic out of harmful places like the ocean, like the water, like the land. It makes such a difference to us if we can do that. So there's a lot of good reasons why recycling is important, but again, I'm a businessman, so it's important that we make a good business out of it as well. We're not doing this as a nonprofit. So the social license part of it is really our responsibility as plastic handlers to do a good job handling the plastic so it doesn't become an eyesore. It doesn't become an environmental nightmare. It doesn't show up in our fish in the ocean. A lot of good reasons why we need to have recycling. How do we do it? Well, let's learn from other materials, because like I said, plastic is probably the least recycled commodity in the world right now. If you look at the best practices of existing plastic recyclers, they actually look very similar to steel. So we're now in the process of rebuilding our plastic recycling business the way steel was first done. If you look at steel and how steel is recycled, it started, if you can see this very well, it started by using very, very low quality steel. So when steel was first recycled at mini mills, they made rebar, low quality, didn't have to be very fancy looking, didn't have to be very special. And then each increase was up to angle bars and structural steels, and then sheet steel allowed them to get better and better quality, higher margins obviously also, but it enhanced the amount of benefits there were for using recycled steel. Well, we're trying to do the same thing with plastic. Some of the plastic now is being used for pallets, plastic lumber, then it's going to flower pots and bins. Then we use for hidden parts that are not visible inside maybe HP printers, but who knows where they might be, mixed with virgin oftentimes. And then where MBA Polymers is, we're actually producing surface parts 100% post-consumer recycled plastic. So our product that we sell is 100% post-consumer recycled plastic. It's a drop-in substitute for virgin plastic. That's the ultimate goal for all plastic recyclers, is to recreate the product as good as it was at the beginning. And that's what our business is all about. There's a lot of different industry groups who have pointed to the steel industry and said, you know, it looks to me like there is a model that plastic can use to recreate the plastic model. So whether it's the Guardian magazine or Phillips articles with sponsoring the Guardian magazine have pointed out the fact that if we just followed the steel recycling model, we'd have an excellent model for doing for plastics, and that's really what MBA Polymers does. So right now, though, a lot of the recycling is done very inefficiently. So what happens is that the product is brought by the trucks, the waste trucks, to a collection center, a MRF, as was described before. Preliminary separations are done, simple separations are done, bottles or bags are separated from other plastics. They're all going to different locations for final separation and final quality checking. They're sent to different locations by trucks or ships, and then they're used in the final product. So that's a pretty inefficient model, and of course you always have the stuff they can't recycle, which then goes to either a residual shipping overseas or to waste energy type facilities. That's a lot of inefficiency. You're handling it so many different times. Our goal is touch it once and move it on. The fewer times you can touch that plastic, the waste material as they might call it, or the resource, the better economics you're going to have. So what we recommend is that once it goes to the collection center, because you still need to collect the material in trucks, you still need to go to the MRFs, you then have it all go to one facility who can then separate all the different types of plastic, whether they be PET, polypropylene bottles, car parts, electronic parts. So there's 6 different polymers that MBA Polymers actually can separate mechanically, and we do it at one facility. It's up here near Sheffield. So we bring all those plastics into one location and we separate them mechanically back to its original type. It then allows us to send that single product wherever we're going to send it, whether it's overseas, because China obviously is the biggest plastic market in the world, and you think about all the things that are made in China. So we send a lot of our plastic to China, but it's virgin substitute plastic. Or the material that can't be recycled, can't be separated, will then be sent to a waste energy facility. Much more efficient, much more economical, and obviously saving a lot of resources of transportation. So again, in terms of resilient recycling, figuring out how to separate the plastics, reduce the handling and transportation costs, Lower CapEx, obviously, you have fewer facilities. Lower operating expenses because you're not moving trucks back and forth. The only people who were making money in those earlier diagrams were the trucking companies, the logistical companies, because they're handling the material over and over and over again. Obviously, you can eliminate those operating expenses. Larger volumes from each source. Obviously, you get the economies of scale when you can get larger volumes. And then obviously, when you have more finished product, you're able to sell to a larger customer base. So someone like, and I don't mean to keep picking on John, but he's right here, so I'll pick on him. HP is a big user of plastic. If you're a small producer, it's pretty hard to get HP's attention because they want to have a supplier who can deliver 500, 1,000 tons a month for their printers. So if you're not big enough to be able to do that, your customer base is not going to be there for you. So economy of scales becomes really important. Why do we believe this will work? Well, MBA Polymers is proving it. We're producing virgin substitute plastic as good as new at prices below virgin, and we're making money at it. So it can be done. The model's there. We can follow the steel industry and keep improving the economics of the model by consolidating more and more in one location. But all of these labels up here are customers of MBA Polymers. We're selling our plastic to these people and they're putting it back into their product. So the model is there, we're proving the model, and so therefore the resource recovery solution is in hand. Now I want to play a slide which I think will show you a little bit about one of our facilities. This particular facility is in Austria, and you'll also have a chance to listen to Mike Biddle as well.
Each year, millions of tons of waste plastic is incinerated or ends up as landfill. But a US company has started a revolution in recycling.
The real reason plastics aren't recycled at high volumes, say, compared to the metals, is because it's much more complicated. MBA essentially broke the code and figured out how to recycle these very complex materials.
We take a low-value material, such as the shredded mixed plastic from end-of-life durable goods, and we could turn that into a high-value commodity.
The value of plastics is actually higher than steel on a price per weight basis. So that's the real loss in not recycling plastics. But there's also a huge environmental burden. So the challenges for us are first to remove the things that aren't plastic. And there's a fair amount of metal in there. There's fabrics and textiles, rubber and foam. And then of course there's the plastics that we're after, and they come in all sizes and shapes. I may have 10 or 15 or even 20 types of plastic in my hand right now, and then the real job becomes of separating these different plastics from one another. I have a PhD in plastics. I can't tell you which plastic is which, and our process is much better than I am at it.
I used to work in the car component industry for 14 years, and I remember a time where we were desperately looking for recycled plastics because plastics prices were going up incredibly. And I always thought, if there is a company out on the market which is able to provide recycling plastics with a stable quality and in stable volumes, then this company must be successful.
The MBA process is based on a complex set of proprietary technologies.
After we've separated the materials by type and by grade, we then upgrade them through a compounding step, and we make a final pellet that's indistinguishable for many purposes from virgin material. We look at ourselves not as a plastics recycler, but as a plastics provider. We're selling plastics to the largest manufacturers in the world. We had to become global essentially overnight.
MBA opened its first plant in Richmond, California, and in 2006 opened a 40,000-ton facility in Guangzhou to develop its business in China.
Our business in China has expanded rapidly. It's in the heart of the electronics industry in southern China. Our plant is located within about 200 kilometers of most of the manufacturing of these electronics in China.
Yeah, and I'm very proud of, to make the so faster progress here in China, and I will be even more proud of that. In the near future, we build up more factories here.
In 2006, MBA also opened a recycling facility in Kaimarten, Austria, to start developing its business in Europe.
I have two major goals for the future. One is to keep my colleagues in operations busy and ensure that all our plants will be running at full capacity. And the other one is to expand and diversify the usage of our premium grades under the EvoSource brand.
In 2009, MBA started construction of its biggest facility yet, located in the UK in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, in a joint development with EMR. EMR is a global leader in recycled products and environmental services, and is a key strategic partner for MBA. The new plant houses the world's most advanced plastics recycling facility.
It's the first MBA Polymers plant that's been designed to treat automotive shredder residue, the residue that comes from end-of-life vehicles after they've been shredded.
For EMR, this is a very significant development. Each year we recycle about 2 million tonnes of consumer-related goods. Typically, we've only been able to recover about 75% of that material, which is mostly the metallic contents. This is a big step forward for us in being able to take another fraction of material out and turn it into a primary recycled material.
We are taking a product that people essentially have in the past thrown away at worst or burnt at best, and returning it back to its prime use.
The UK plant is particularly significant for two reasons. One, it's our largest and our most technologically advanced, but it's also processing perhaps the most complicated mixed plastic waste stream on the planet.
One question we frequently get asked is how big and how much potential is there for the MBA technology and the MBA business model. We believe that there's at least potential for producing 1 million tons of post-consumer recycled plastic. That's 1 million tons. If we sell it at even $1,000 a ton, that's $1 billion business. So there's a huge market potential.
We are very excited about the range of new customers we've got to work with, who we've convinced we can be a high quality and reliable supplier of significant quantities of post-consumer recycled plastics. And that means more plants, more jobs, more recycled plastic.
This has been a 20-year journey developing this technology, and having a lot of people in my industry, the plastics industry, say that it was impossible. Our plans going forward are to build 1 to 2 manufacturing plants per year around the world. I'm an environmentalist at heart, but I'm a businessman bottom line. So for me, it was always about creating a new type of plastics company that would have a lower cost basis. Whenever I walk into the factory, the first thing I listen for is the material going into the silos. That means we're making money.
I got it in time, so I can have time for questions.
Okay. Does anyone have a question for Richard?
Thank you for your talk. I wonder, because today is really focused on recycling, so I hear also you talk a lot about recycling, but I think the fundamental thing is also that you create a problem by creating the plastic, and then I think to go back to the steel, that's not completely fair, because there is already a big problem in the ocean with plastic. And I wonder, or I would like to also hear from a big company like you are, what kind of things you do to put research in the origin of the product, and to see if you can do anything with how you start with a product to maybe change that, so that there's not a problem in the end. So I think to only look at recycling, in my opinion, that will not solve your problem with the attitude of that people also have at it. I think I don't hear enough innovation, in my opinion.
Good question.
Sorry to be so critical, but I think we are here really also to be critical. So
yeah, no, that's fine, and it's a good question, because the reality is, as has been discussed here today, if we don't design recyclability or sustainability into the product, and we don't develop the right support for the legislative issues for making sure that plastic doesn't go into landfill or doesn't get thrown in the ground, if we don't have those resources, then MBA's business doesn't exist, because we can only exist if the metal recyclers get the whole products and they shred them, and then we get the plastic scrap from the metal recyclers. If we have to go out and collect it ourselves, we don't have a business. So,
yeah, but you have to move on as well. I think nothing is always the same. We all,
right.
I think if you are a big company, also you have to to try to innovate
Right.
even more radical?
I think there's probably limits to what we can do as a company. We're not that big. We're not as big as HP by any means. So we have a limited ability to take advantage of what's materials out there. We can definitely participate in conferences like this to try to educate people about what the recyclability of and the sustainability of these products are, encourage more of that kind of thing. But probably it's beyond our scope to try to go out and actually push people into designing materials separately. Now, I did kind of push on John today, saying, John, you need to have more recycled plastic in your printers, and you need to design that. But that's obviously, and he knows he wants to do that, so that's not an issue. But it takes a lot of effort, a whole kind. Now it's a nice segue because there's a press release right out here that we're just issuing. Basically, it says that the EU legislative process is not really providing enough support for recycling. And it's odd when you think about it because the EU is definitely in favor of recycling. But on the one hand, they are in favor of recycling and they penalize companies for throwing things away. On the other hand, they set these targets and standards for what can go into recycled products that are almost impossible to achieve. So you have this kind of duplicity that goes on that the left hand's not talking to the right. So actually the press release was signed by British Plastic Federation in URI, all the big industry groups for plastics in UK and Europe, as well as our company MBA Polymers, Müller Guttenbrunn in Austria, and Galoo Plastics and Axion here in the UK. So we're trying to generate a lot of awareness for the very issue you're talking about, which is we need to have an industry and a legislative collaborative process to make sure that there is a pathway towards reusing these materials, and it's not just a pipe dream.
And a short question as well, like what if the government in 5 years' time tells you if you produce something, you're also responsible for the end product, so you also are responsible for your own recycling.
Right.
Do you still exist then, or?
Well, no, we would definitely be existing. We'd just be in a different form. We would work closely. One of the images you saw up there was a more consistent manner by which all collection materials go into one location. I think what you're talking about is the Japanese model. Japanese country, Japan was the first country to actually require recycling of 4 major appliances, and they required Mitsubishi, Hitachi, the makers of those products, to actually recycle it themselves. That's not proven to be a very good model because when you get rid of a washing machine or an air conditioner, you don't know whether it's a Mitsubishi brand or a Hitachi brand, you don't know where to send it. So there's some confusion about that, but the idea is the original equipment is responsible for getting it recycled. The European Union, UK, US has not adopted it quite that far, but they do require fees from these companies to make sure there is an incentive to recycle the product. So they've gotten kind of partially there, but they're not yet far enough. And when, like I say, when we get into these situations where the legislative environment is such that they're actually discouraging recycling on the one hand, encouraging it on one hand, discouraging it on the other, it gets really confusing.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I think also to Richard's defense that, they probably have one of the most advanced recycling systems that are out there, and you're trying to capture stuff and sort it, which is so difficult. In a perfect world, if your answer was that everyone did that, then he would be out of business. But there's so much volume out there, roughly only 10% of the world's plastic that's made, maybe 15 actually gets recycled. So there's 85% of everything produced that can still be used in some new process somehow, and that's a huge amount of volume.
we could get a lot bigger if we can get access to more of that material.
And if we don't do these kind of things with the innovation, then it will bleed into the system or landfills.
And in part of this is an effort to try to encourage the regulatory bodies to provide more incentives for using post-consumer recycled plastic. You may have heard EPEAT. I don't, you haven't mentioned it here in this conference, but EPEAT is a program by the U.S. government that gives incentives to people like HP to use post-consumer recycled plastic in their printer, and they'll give a benefit to a HP printer versus a Dell printer if HP printers have more post-consumer recycled plastic in them. So that there needs to be more of that. Europe doesn't have an EP program. China doesn't have an EP program. I'm hoping that will change because, again, that will encourage and incentivize companies to make more products with post-consumer recycled plastic.
Great, Richard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.